All right, we are live. I just got the word. And first of all, thank you all for joining us tonight. This has been a journey of years and years and even centuries, if you take into account some of the works that we're going to be discussing tonight. My name is Brian Vines, and I'm going to be the moderator, and I'm also the person who's partially responsible for this little bit of a late start time. So I'm not going to go on and on. I'm just going to say that Zoom is real, and so is the talent of our two authors who I'm so happy to be in conversation with tonight. We have Lucile Scott, who is here, and the author of Mystics. Help me, keep me honest here, Lucile.
An American Covenant. I think you were about to give us the subtitle.
Right, An American Covenant, which in itself is a whole story that we're going to get into. Like, if you begin to decipher all the things that begin with the premise of an American Covenant, and none of them quite like yours. There's interesting stuff that's coming up. And Melissa Falavino, who's the author of Tomboyland, a series of essays. I was in the room and I saw a lot of us are very excited to speak with these two authors tonight, chiefly myself among them. So I want to begin right at the beginning. This was very interesting for me to be reading both of your works at the same time and like holding space for them in my brain. But I was very struck by something that you, Melissa, wrote, where early on in your collection, you talked about being from the Midwest and not being a person who talks about yourself. It's sort of central to the identity of being a Chicago boy myself.
Oh, nice.
In that Midwestern thing, like we aren't like braggadocious people where it's like the last thing you do is talk about yourself. But here it is that the both of you have written these pieces that are so personal, and you are at the center of the story. And to the extent, Lucile, you're at the center of these interweaving narratives as well. So I just want to ask both of you, and I'll start with you, Melissa, since you were the one who said, hey, I'm from the Midwest, I don't talk about myself. Yet 200 some pages later, we know a lot about you.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's a weird thing, and it's something that I haven't quite figured out about myself, this like this drive to tell very personal stories when I come from a place where we don't do that. And you know, I've thought a lot about it, like where does that come from, and where does the drive come from, and why is it important? And I go back and forth. You know, there are days when I feel wildly uncomfortable sharing incredibly personal stories. Usually I feel wildly uncomfortable, but then there are days when I feel like, okay, this is important. It's important to tell my truth. It's important to talk about the things that we don't talk about, at least where I come from, and talk to other people who have similar stories to try to get at certain questions or truths, and just to say some things aloud that I think, you know, a lot of us are taught to not say aloud, and you know, with the hope that other people might read it and it might resonate, and that they might feel a little less alone in the world, I think.
Melissa, the same thing. I'm sorry, not Melissa, Lucile. I'm looking at you now. The same sort of question, where you come from this very rich and robust journalistic background, where I'm sure by training, you're not to put yourself in the middle of stories and like keep things to a factual basis. But you did such a beautiful and almost genre bending storytelling arc, where you were able to interweave so much personal with so much historical context. So I wonder how you felt about getting from behind this, I guess, the veil of this journalistic distance that so often is imposed on journalists, and inserting yourself into some of these wonderful, crazy narratives.
I think I like that you phrase that as being behind a veil of journalistic distance, because I'm not from the Midwest, but I'm from Kentucky, which I would define as the northernmost southern state. But I, by natural inclination, don't love to talk about myself a lot. I like to talk, you know, but I'll talk about ideas and whatever else, but don't really talk about personal information a whole lot. And so in a way, I think I have my own veil of distance often just while relating to people, as one also does as a journalist. And so I think when I started writing this book, I thought I would sort of go to mystic events and didn't totally plan to make it as personal as it ended up being. But sort of the journey of researching these women and going to these events really was part of a personal journey that involved a lot about myself. And it just felt like what I wanted to do to bring that into the story. And I feel like it does, just from a narrative perspective, sort of tie it together and give it a sort of emotional arc in a way that it might not otherwise have, because it is about these 5 different women in different periods.
Yeah, these 5 women who, as you're reading it and the way that you interwove personal stories about where you were and what you were doing and how they bumped up against these women, it really like made everything so permeable. Like I had the sense that I was in New Orleans. I had the sense that I was in Chicago. There were all of these different, and of course in Brooklyn, there were all these different sort of threads that were coming together and separating simultaneously. But looking at the overall structure of both of your works and how personal they were and how forthcoming each of you were about everything ranging from depression or suicidal ideations or physical harms that have been done and enacted upon you by others or yourselves. And I just found myself liking both of you so much. And I wondered, sharing so much of this personal stuff, if you had any idea of how you wanted the readers to perceive you.
Ooh, that's a good question.
Because everyone's always like, oh, who'd you write this for? And it's like, you're writing for who's ever going to plunk down the bucks and read the thing or like steal it from their roommate, I imagine. But I wonder if you, like, as you're writing, do you pay any attention or have any care for how some kid is going to perceive you? Or like, because I found myself liking and drawn to both of you for different reasons.
I think that I don't know if I thought so much about how I would be perceived as more that I think a lot of people are drawn to the mystic for similar reasons as I was and that I discussed in the book. And I guess kind of as Melissa already said, but just wanting people to be able to see themselves in my journey and sort of my experiences. But yeah, I guess I also wanted to seem like funny, you know?
Melissa, how much did that play on your mind? Did you care at all? Because you laid so much bare, and the quotes that you pulled in, like from everyone from Zora Neale Hurston to Bible verses, really helped to contextualize, I think, for a lot of people who might come from disparate backgrounds or ways of looking at things. But what did you think of this idea ultimately that people might be judging or thinking about you or perceiving you?
I mean, it was constantly on my mind, the sort of how, I guess it less like how will people like me, I guess, and more like how is this going to be perceived from people from disparate backgrounds and with different belief systems. And what was really important to me in writing a lot of these pieces, especially when I was dealing with stuff that's highly controversial, like guns, and like parenthood and queerness and, you know, these things that like are legislated, you know, and deeply important for a lot of people. I wanted to be as forthcoming about my own, like the things that I felt very strongly about, but also about the complexities in my own sort of ideas and questions and beliefs, I guess. So much of this book was about the things that I have questions about that I haven't figured out yet. So I think that a lot of it was like, as I was writing some of these pieces, I was like, I want like the curiosity that I feel about a particular topic or a subject to come through. And I want my reader to feel curious too, and to like catch that curiosity, you know? So I think that that was part of it. And I certainly did think sometimes, like, especially when I was writing like the gun essay, you know, I have my own political views about gun control and gun laws, and I'm pretty firmly anti-gun, but I wanted to talk to, you know, I interviewed a bunch of people who own guns in the Midwest, and I wanted to like talk to them and to have them tell their stories in their own voices so that people with my views might, you know, hear those stories and not necessarily think differently, but see those people as complex people. So that was really important to me. I think as much as like I wanted to express myself in this like complicated way, I wanted to, what was most important was to tell these stories of other people and my subjects that I was interviewing, like as truthfully and as honestly and as holistically as possible. Yeah, I don't know.
So you spoke for a second about this idea of guns being controversial. And one thing that really wove through both of your works was how much of your time each of you are. And one thing I'm thinking, Lucile, is as I was reading about these women that you shared some of their stories and outlined their lives and how it intersects with mysticism, is really how these women were products of the time that they were living in. And you open the book very presently with something about Brett Kavanaugh and his confirmation and being on the Supreme Court. And as we're sitting here in this moment with the cultural war that is raging and even further impending, I'm really thinking about you being a person of your time and how mysticism is woven through your life and how you think it might show up in an iteration in 2020.
Yes, no. So the book opens with a hex that these witches in Brooklyn were doing to Brett Kavanaugh, and of course we're at that moment again. And actually, one thing that I have been thinking about a lot, and it is also in the introduction of the book, is that 2 years ago in 2018, an astrologer said to me that in 2020 we would begin transitioning into either a 2,000-year era of matriarchy or chaos, which I defined as tribal fear and loathing, or communal peace and love, and the choice was ours. And now here we are in 2020, and that is, you know, the structures around us seem to be dissolving. And I think as that is occurring, I think since 2016, since Trump was elected, a lot of people have been turning towards the mystic and these types of things for a new way forward, and also a sense of something to turn to as systems that we rely on seem to be falling apart. And I anticipate that will only get stronger as the feeling of that increases. And I know, I mean, after RBG died last week, people unprompted texted both me and my wife Ellie, who stuff about how they hope all the witches are doing spells because they don't know if there's anything else that can save us at this moment in time. So I do think, and it also, I think what the book is trying to speak to is the fact that the mystic has always been an undercurrent in America. It's been a very progressive one, and it also has a spiritual bent, which is something that many people want in their lives. And if we're looking for new ways forward and new things to rely on, it could be sort of an alternate sort of spiritual basis for the American experiment, if you will. And I think that with it it has always advocated and focused on progressive causes. So I think that is also something that appeal to people right now.
So right from the outset, if you're perusing the book aisle, and I should mention that American Covenant is forthcoming, you can pre-order right now. It's going to drop October 6th. And I know, Melissa, your book came out last month, so in August. So this is a super exciting time, and I feel very lucky that I got to read your book before the rest of the world. It's awesome. I urge you, implore you to read both of these works. But looking at the titles, just based on the outside walking past them alone, if you're still a person who can go to a bookstore masked up, but Tomboy and Mysticism, and boiling it down to two words, like Tomboy and Witch, these two titles that are thrust upon people. And I'm wondering how each of you might negotiate this idea of pejoratives or reclaiming or dismantling each or the relationship that you have to these supposed titles, whether they're self-imposed and something you wear, or a la Dan Savage are reclaiming and making work for your community. So Melissa, I'll start with you. Tomboyland, you break down the etymology back to 1500 something and bring it right forward to this moment. But what's your working definition of tomboy as it has shown up in your life?
That's a great question. And I think that like part of the reason that that word is a part of my title is because so much of this book is about language and about feeling like you don't have the words to describe certain, you know, identities or feelings or whatever, being in sort of the liminal spaces of existence, and using words that are available, but also acknowledging like the conflict in them, and you know, learning to embrace them anyway, because language is power and silence is violence, and you know, like being able to say things aloud even when they're complicated. And this idea of reclamation is a really big part of it too, like reclaiming body and identity and words around these things. So for me, Tomboyland was it's just a made up word that came up as we were like working on edits, and I was working with my editor, Hafiza Jeter, on this book, and I had a different working title, and she was really pushing toward like having tomboy something in the title, and we wanted to really like connect it to the land, because land is so important too for this book, and also the complications of land and home and claiming land and claiming a home. And it just sort of like happened. We were brainstorming and this word happened, and we were like, I remember having a conversation like, what does that word mean? Like, what does it mean to you? And as I was working on edits, I kind of like riffed on the idea of it, and it felt right because it's made up, and all words are made up. We create language, and when there isn't a word that fits, we create another one. And in the near title essay of the book, Tomboy, I talk about, like you mentioned, Brian, like the long ago origins of this word and how they were actually, like, nobody knows this, but they were based in like pretty racist origins, and like then there was a reclaiming of the word, and then it was used pejoratively, and then it was reclaimed again. So it has this sort of like weirdly cyclical history where it was sort of used as this innocuous thing, and then this harmful thing, and then this racist thing, and then another sort of innocuous thing, and then a sort of banner of like queer pride and reclamation. So the word itself is super fascinating and problematic and powerful, and words can do all of those things and often do.
Well, with respect to that, Lucille, I'm looking at you thinking about the power of words and them having a meaning, and something you wrote that I was struck by that I had no idea of. There are actually more people who describe themselves as Wiccan than there are Presbyterians. So we actually have more witches than Presbyterians in the world, if the numbers of self-identifiers are to be believed. But most often, especially in this political context, you hear witch hunt coming up more than ever, especially spewed by the president and whatever thing that he's dodging on whatever hour he's doing it. But I'm wondering, witches have held so much power and sway over popular imagining, but your entire work is about hashtag hexing the patriarchy. And I'm wonder how we can leverage that language and this really broad imagination that we have about witches and this idea of female power into political action right now.
Sure. So I think my book is about 5 women, only one of whom would have specifically identified as a witch. The other 4, I'm sure, were called it at many points, because as you said, any woman that harnesses this power is called that. And also, I want to add that all of these women, most of them, sort of existed at moments in America where it felt like we were coming towards a breaking point. The power of mysticism tends to appeal to the masses at these very moments and tends to have a real impact on culture. And so I think explicitly identifying as a witch, it has been used, you know, going back to the witch hunts, which began sort of in the 1400s. It was used for any women that did not fit sort of, if we're talking about hexing the patriarchy, sort of the patriarchal norms of what a woman should be. And if you were loud and free thinking, if you were barren, if you were old, if you were a midwife, if you were doing anything that wasn't just serving your function of reproducing and being a wife, kind of, you were a witch. So I think witches are proudly saying, yes, I am free thinking, and yes, I make my own choices. And also I think it's very tied into mysticism, which is as an important part as the label witch as it's applied to all women. And the mystic is an idea that sort of the divine force is in you, and you can access it via these various channels, and various traditions have various ways of doing it, where sort of more patriarchal religions tell you that only people that have been properly ordained through the proper channels are able to really do that, and they bestow that upon you. So it's really taking that power for yourself and claiming your own sort of divine nature. And when you tap into that, you therefore feel empowered to sort of change the world. So I think a witch is both proud to be an whatever she, he, or they thinks that their gender should be, plus they are tapping that force within and taking it out into the world to try and change things.
So this reminds me of a quick thing that you wrote, Melissa. It was an exchange that you had with a therapist, and I made a note of it that I'm looking for right now about, here it is. You said to a therapist, "I'm afraid of losing my identity." To which the therapist partly replied, "Identity isn't what people think of you, it's how you think of yourself." And the way that my brain works, it tied into something that you wrote, Lucile, about HPB talking about her favorite fable, The Girl in the Patchwork Dress. So it's about that, which was a story I wasn't even aware of at all. And it wasn't about waiting for the magic to come. It was about forging and making your own way and creating something. So just seeing that linkage, I guess my question is, Melissa, this idea of making identity and it not being something that you could lose or is threatened unless it's by you. And then Lucile, also not waiting for the savior or the magic, but creating the magic from within. I just thought there was a beautiful symmetry in these two expressions of what I see as the same thing. So I'm wondering how you're creating and maintaining that identity, Melissa.
I can't wait to read Lucile's book.
It's a goodie.
I'm excited. Just you're talking and I'm like hearing all of these intersections, and I'm just super pumped about it.
I think they make great companions. The people at TOPPLE have done a fantastic job of releasing these titles. They should be sold in a variety pack. So you get, like, I implore you all to like make a book club and read these two concurrent. But Melissa, I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, identity is something that like this book grapples with, and I think a lot of it was like born of this liminal sort of feeling, and that essay Tomboy came. I'm like a long game writer. I spend years and years working on a single essay, but that essay came in like a torrent, and it was after the 2016 election, and I was just, terrified and enraged and really confused about like how this could happen. And, there were so many things happening in my own brain and in like the minds and hearts of people who are close to me. So it just sort of came in this torrent, and I realized that so much of it was about the struggle to define myself, and this feeling that we have to define ourselves and that we have to adhere to certain like static labels in order to belong. And so it was a kind of resistance like against that, or resisting that, like we have to be one thing or this static thing, and this sort of embracing of fluidity in life, and finding kind of the power in that, and the strength in that, rather than the fear and the uncertainty. And so it's almost like I see that essay as functioning as kind of a document of like the process of coming to terms with like being okay with not knowing exactly what you are, and like and embracing your various intersections and how they may or may not fit into certain communities, and finding belonging where you can, especially when we're like constantly under threat. So I don't know. I mean, it's just I'm still fascinated with it, and I think that I'll be writing about it for a long time in certain ways. You know, like how identity is not static, and it changes, and you know we can't lose it because we make it.
Do you have a riff on this, Melissa?
Lucy,
I'm sorry, Lucille.
Well, I was sort of thinking, yeah, a lot along the lines of I think the mystic in the book also speaks a lot to queerness and the function of binaries and sort of controlling us, which sort of the mystic is seeking to take away the comfort of that control. And that control, I guess, is a byproduct of the patriarchy. We all fit in our boxes, and those boxes have certain functions, and then we all can be controlled. And sort of breaking free of that and sort of allowing both the chaos and the beauty of that space to be how you define your life, I think is ultimately much freer, ultimately much more inclusive, and it's powerful, and that power scares certain people who would like to control everyone. So that is what I was thinking about my book as Melissa was speaking.
Well, one thing that comes back around full circle is you talked about this pouring out of you at 2016 after what happened. And I was reminded of the section on Marianne Williamson and the would-be president of the United States, and what it would mean for us to be in the position to have this powerful woman who's at the intersection of Oprah, AIDS activism, love, all of these things that were introduced into the American vernacular while she was on the stage behind that podium that we weren't talking about before. And I'm wondering about the present moment that we're in and looking for coalition building. And you spoke about the queerness that's inherent in so much of this mysticism and all of these connections that can happen. And I wonder about, for both of you, making space and centering queer stories and bringing queer voices to the front, and just the possibility for coalition building if we are indeed in that moment that the mystic said we got a choice to make in 2020, and what coalition building amongst queer folks and people who are ascribed to the patriarchy right now just because it's been the default, but it's not really serving them if they really were to interrogate it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Melissa can take a crack at this if she would like, but I think that where the mystic serves in building a coalition, I think that people who are subscribing to the patriarchy and queer folks and everyone else have a lot in common in this country and can come together and build coalitions and get things done, and ideally get us out of the place that is feeling like there's this centrifugal force pulling us down. But that is not inevitable. But I do think that sort of part of our journey to not just sort of survive this situation, but maybe get somewhere better, is to have sort of Marianne Williamson talks a lot about the light and the dark psychic forces, and sort of things that these are unconscious, be they mystic or whatever, they are unconscious forces, and their narratives and what is existing there gets built by sort of the myths that built our culture. So even if we don't think we subscribe to sort of patriarchal stories and religions and all of these things, they still built who we are and what our culture does. And so the mystic provides new myths and new ways to shift that, to slowly shift the entire culture if it became prevalent enough. that we could move somewhere new. And every woman in my book did that in different ways. I mean, speaking of queerness, HPB, who you referred to earlier, was Helena Blavatsky, but she, you know, lived in the 1800s and did not define herself any way, but was clearly very, I would say, genderqueer, super androgynous. Like,
wore trousers.
Yeah, she wore trousers. There are any number of things that occur. So, and many of these people sort of, by channeling spirits, were able to encompass masculine characteristics in ways they would not have otherwise been permitted to do. And so, yeah, so that is sort of on a different topic, but a force that I think at that time changed perceptions about women's roles and can continue to shape our culture in many other ways.
I love that idea, especially that device of mysticism as being a freeing agent that is beyond the binary or the constraints of the patriarchy or any of these other boxes that we are placed in willingly and unwillingly all the time. So we are coming up on our time ending. And I know that I had said that maybe we could get some reading in. So I don't know if there is a particular section that either of you would like to share, or if we want to close out our time. Not that it's absolutely closing right now, but I will give you the choice if you want to read something or if I should just interrogate you for 1 second longer. There's no improper answer because the folks can't quite get Lucile's book, and I'm sure they would love to hear something in your own voice as well, Melissa. So I'm opening the door.
I'm game either way. Whatever the energy is dictating, I'll go happily go either way.
All right. Do you have
agree.
a section? Lucile, what were you saying?
I agree. I have no strong opinions. Whatever the energy is.
I would love to hear both of you read. I was the kid in school. Miss Westfall was my school librarian. And she used to always give me like claps at the end of the year because I read every biography in the library because I'm obsessed with biography. And both of your works have such a great way of weaving your personal narrative in with the broader context. So I would love to hear either of you read something. So Melissa, I'm looking at you. You're in my corner box over here. So by default, break us off a little Tomboyland.
Okay. Well, since we're talking about tomboys, I guess I will read from a section about tomboys and tomboyhood. This is from Tomboyland. All right. Growing up, I was a tomboy. It's what people called me and what I eventually started calling myself. At first, I resisted the word. I knew when people called me tomboy, it was meant to call out my difference, that it set me apart from the other girls in my small Midwestern town. And back then, I didn't want to be different. On more than one occasion, I recall my small self, fists on hips, insisting, I'm a tom girl, and campaigning to get the word to stick. But I also secretly loved the word boy attached to me. I played with the boys and acted like a boy. I fought and spat and swore and yelled, climbed trees and built forts and splashed in the mud. I played sports and rode bikes and banged up my knees. I hated anything deemed girly, rejected dresses and dolls in the color pink. When I was in second grade, I insisted my mother let me cut my hair short and spiky like all the other boys. After weeks of begging, she relented, with the caveat that I leave it long in the back. She cut around my ears and I sculpted my spikes with gel, the rest of my hair cascading down my back, the first of several horrible mullets. On a deeper level, though, I often felt like a boy. I often wished I was a boy. Sometimes I even prayed to be a boy, pleading with a God I wasn't even sure I believed in, that I might wake up the following day and everything would be different. I'll stop there so we can save time for Lucile.
Dun, dun, dun. Oh, it goes on. So, Lucile, you're in my other box here. We would love to hear something from the forthcoming American Covenant.
Right. So since we're talking about sort of witches and the patriarchy and all this, I just thought I would read the beginning of the section that is actually about our witch, Susanna Budapest, author, activist, lesbian witch, and feminist goddess worshiper. And the chapter is called Welcome to the Machine. Later, she'd remember the lice, trading the family gold for lentils, eating the meat of emaciated horses who died on the narrow Budapest streets. She'd remember watching her favorite teddy bear shake on the floor of the cold cellar as a bomb reduced her fourth-floor home in the posh apartment building to rubble. She'd remember playing around the legs of a man sitting on a park bench, comforted by his woolen-trousered calm amid the blocks of decimation, only to look up to see that the man was a corpse. She couldn't forget her mother's and aunt's panic scramble to hide each time the armed German and later Russian soldiers banged on their door. She couldn't forget her mother leaping from her paper-thin refuge to bite a soldier's nose as he dragged her Aunt Titi away. The bleeding soldier cracked her mother, Mystica, with the butt of his rifle, but left both women behind. Aunt Titi taught the girl, Susanna, born during a blizzard in January 1940, to pray to the ancient Hungarian glad woman. Susanna then determined that, though she was the smallest of them all, she could shield the entire family with her mystic might, seize control amidst chaos. Such power was her blood right. Her family could trace their line to 1270, and Susanna later counted 4 aunts who had been burned alive at the stake, which is all, they'd said. When her grandmother, Ilona, a former suffragist, died of starvation during the war, her spirit appeared to the then 3-year-old Susanna. The child, who could not yet formulate a complex sentence, took the sighting as an oath from Ilona, a vow of protection stronger than the violent earthly might closing in. Mystica, her mother, had been born wild as the Mestek Mountains. She learned to read tarot cards and the winds from the family servants. She then dedicated her life to art and channeling the mystic flow. But when she'd married at age 22, her handsome 35-year-old husband forbade her from working in her sculpture studio, demanding she devote herself in full to her role as his wife. Mystica withdrew. In the only childhood picture Susanna has of her with her mother, she is 9 months old and reaching for the nanny. Then the war came. Still, Mystica soon scooped up her daughter and fled to the countryside, somehow successfully evading the tanks and bullets as if shielded. It seemed to Susanna. There, life seemed more like living. The country relatives had cows, and the cows still made milk. They had cheese to eat and even bread. Little Susanna watched the country people dance around a maypole, holding bright swaths of cloth made magic in choreographed flight, an expression of an age-old pagan fertility rite. She heard of herbal remedies too, and healing incantations, the hushed talk of the old ways. Susanna recalled playing in a barn among big brown fuzzy columns, unaware the horse's hooves could have proved fatal, until the adults found her there and scolded her. These legs, at least, belonged to the living. She recalled fluffy ducklings plodding to the pond, the differing songs of day and night birds, the rising and setting of the sun and moon, the calm constancy of the natural rhythms. Then, when Susanna was 6, Mystica got cholera. She placed her daughter in the indefinite care of a country nunnery with a wrought iron gate and halls lined with images of a wrathful god and his army of tortured, often maimed saints. Long before Susanna first intuited the spiritual clashes that rolled through the Hungarian countryside of her youth, somewhere between 70,000 and 30,000 BCE, the great goddess who created the world began to shine, exalted above all other deities. It's a history recorded only in the bulbous bellies and breasts of opaque stone figurines, but one, blending both legend and fact, that would nevertheless make it through the millennia to Susanna. The great goddess, do I still have time? Should I keep going? This then goes on through how the goddess sort of got smudged out of existence, but I don't want to take up too much time.
No, I thank you for that. And I am getting the time cue from our remote director. So again, I just want to thank you for the time that you spent here and encourage everyone to get together in their circles or their covens and read these 2 works. Really, just listening to you read reminded me as I was reading, it's like Anthony Bourdain of mysticism, the way that you're like throwing back and going forward, putting me in the room and taking me on travels with you. And Melissa, it's like a synthesis of reading like David Sedaris meets Maya Angelou and Zora Neale Hurston, like so revelatory and fresh. You made me think of Pogs and all those goofy songs that I used to love coming up, being that Midwestern guy. So thank you both for sharing the time. I encourage everyone to get a copy of Tomboyland that is out currently, and reserve that copy of American Covenant. Both phenomenal works. So happy to spend this time with you. Thank you for making this year's virtual book festival amazing.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been great.
All right,
Yep.
so thank you all for joining us. We're going to sign off for now, but yes, get those books and share them widely, the suggestions at least with your friends. Make them buy their own copy. But enjoy your time at the Book Fest, and we'll see you next year and throughout the year. Stay safe and be well, and happy reading, everyone. Good night.